This is KM Weiland, and you are listening to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, 6 Ways to Craft Spectacular Set Piece Scenes. What are set piece scenes? They're the big ones. They're the scenes that define your story, not just in terms of plot mechanics, but particularly in terms of scope and impact. These are the scenes your audience will remember when they think about your story. They're the scenes they'll remember even when they've forgotten everything else about your story. As screenwriter Matt Bird put it in his book, Secrets of Story, these are the scenes with images so captivating and iconic that they're chosen for the book covers, movie posters, and production stills. In many instances, these scenes might be the ones that first inspired your desire to write this story. Very likely, they're the scenes you've looked forward to writing for the whole book, and indeed the scenes you've enjoyed writing the most. But they can also be more than a little challenging to write, particularly since your story's success hangs on its set piece scenes. For the most part, the rules of writing a good set piece scene are no different from writing any other scene in your book. But because they almost always occur around structurally necessary beats within the story, they do come with extra pressure and significance. Today, let's take a little jaunt through the possibilities for identifying and amping up the most important moments in your story. So first things first, how do you know which scenes should be considered set piece scenes? Generally, a set piece scene will distinguish itself with 2 factors. Factor number 1, what happens in the scene is important for moving the plot. And factor number 2, what happens in the scene is particularly colorful and entertaining, whatever that means according to your chosen genre. Now, number 1 on that list makes it clear that every structural beat within a story offers the inherent opportunity for a set piece scene. Although every scene should move the plot in some way, the main structural beats specifically function as pivots within the external plot. This is particularly true of the 3 plot points that split the book into fourths: the first plot point, the midpoint, and the third plot point. And just as a reminder, I'm just going to really quick list the major beats and their ideal timing within the story. So we have the inciting event around the 12% mark, the first plot point around the 25% mark, the first pinch point around the 37% mark, the midpoint or second plot point around the 50% mark, the second pinch point around the 62% mark, the third plot point around the 75% mark, and the climax beginning around the 88% mark. And of course, I explore all of these structural beats much more deeply on my site in mini posts, as well as my book, Structuring Your Novel. So just because a scene contains a major structural beat will not automatically make it stand out as a set piece scene within your story. It is possible, especially in quieter, character-driven stories, for the plot beats to pass almost without fanfare in the outer plot if most of the change is happening internally for the characters. A set piece scene will be one that is not only important, but one that is noticeably big in some way. If you think about some of your favorite books and movies, the scenes that immediately pop to mind are likely some of the story's set piece scenes. For example, Elizabeth Bennet's dance with Mr. Darcy at the Netherfield Ball in Pride and Prejudice, the Civil War fight between the Avengers at the Berlin airport in Captain America: Civil War, George Bailey upending his honeymoon after the run on the bank in It's a Wonderful Life, Harry Potter reaching Hogwarts for the first time in The Philosopher's Stone, and the book burning in The Book Thief. Now, this is not to say all your favorite scenes will be set piece scenes. Some of my favorite scenes in any story are often the quiet reaction or sequel scenes that take place after the big showy events of the set piece scenes. But usually the imagery is notably strongest in the set piece scenes. When you are thinking about how to strengthen set piece scenes in your story, Look first at the major structural beats. Are they all as strong as they can be? Do they all move the plot? Are the events in each one unique and exciting? Are these the scenes readers will skip pages for because they're so excited to read them? And then here are 6 more considerations that you can keep in mind when amping up your story's most important scenes. Consideration number 1. Pay particular attention to scene structure. Stripped down to basics, scene structure is about making sure each scene unfolds with a realistic arc in a way that links each scene to the one that came before and the one that came after. There are many systems for structuring scenes. My favorite remains that of scene and sequel, but they all come down to cause and effect, action and reaction. The more blatant this connection, the more plot-driven your story will tend to be. But regardless your approach, scene structure is important in every scene if your story is to come together into a cohesive whole. Scene structure is especially important in set piece scenes, not just because they are the scenes of the entire story, but also because they tend to be longer and more sprawling than other scenes. In fact, it's not uncommon for set piece scenes to expand into set piece sequences. Many of the major structural moments of your story, the midpoint and climax in particular, may not neatly fit into single scenes. Rather, they may require multiple related scenes linked together by an overarching goal. For example, if your midpoint features a heist sequence, your characters will enact specific smaller goals in smaller scenes, building up to the larger goal of stealing the payload at the end of the sequence. Consideration number 2. Identify the scene's particular theme. So, just as scene sequences are defined in a story by a particular unifying idea, so are set piece scenes, no matter their length. A set piece scene isn't just a scene in which the protagonist kisses her love interest for the first time. A set piece scene is the scene of the kiss, or the duel, or the protest, or the accident, or the squirrel. Do what you will with that one. In identifying your set piece scenes, go beyond simply describing their events to nailing down a single, simple, unifying focus that drives this powerhouse moment in your story. Think not just about what physically happens in the scene, but also what images pop or what significant change will occur within your character as a result of the scene's events. Consideration number 3. Brainstorm extra special settings. In addition to the physical action that will often provide the foundation for memorable imagery within your story, one extra quick way to boost set piece scenes is to amp their settings. Not every set piece scene needs to take place in a new or different setting, and indeed, too many settings may weaken some stories. But making sure each set piece scene is given an important, evocative, or even iconic setting can take everything to the next level. And then, of course, you must bring this setting to life so readers can see it clearly and therefore remember it. Consideration number 4. Choreograph necessary characters. Some set piece scenes may be relatively simple, requiring only 2 characters, or perhaps even just your protagonist. But often, they will be sprawling affairs requiring your entire cast, and perhaps a crowd of extras as well. The first consideration here is to make sure you do indeed need every character you think you do. Often, sidelining an unnecessary character or 2 can make the scene that much more streamlined and accessible. But if you do require a large cast for the events of your scene, you'll want to pay extra attention to choreographing their presence, not just in the scene itself, but particularly in the lead-in and lead-out of the scene. How will you realistically gather all your characters in this one space and then send them on their ways afterwards so they are positioned for their next appearances? In some cases, this will be extremely easy and intuitive. That is, all your characters are already in the same space. But in others, it will require some forethought. Consideration number 5, identify all characters' goals. In writing scenes that feature multiple characters, you will want to make sure you are not focusing on the main action of the protagonist's goal to the exclusion of every other character's goal. After all, why are all these other people here? If they really need to be in this scene, it's because they have a reason, a motive, a goal to be there. Look particularly to the main antagonist in the scene. And this will be whichever character is providing the primary opposition to the protagonist's forward movement in the scene. What does this character want? And then look to any other characters who have speaking roles in the scene. And finally, even if you never directly mention them in the scene, try to at least bring your own awareness to the reasons any bystanders are present in this scene. You can mine lots of opportunities for depth and complexity just in this one consideration. And consideration number 6, double check plot, character, and theme. Because set piece scenes are the microcosm of your entire story, it is particularly important that they represent your story's plot, character development, and theme at their strongest. These scenes, especially if they are structural beats, well define your story, whether you want them to or not. If plot, character, and theme are off kilter in these scenes, the cohesion of the entire story will falter, perhaps fatally. Although you can analyze and address plot, character, and theme as individual entities within a story, they are ultimately 3 parts of a single engine. If one truly works, all 3 work. If one falters, all falter. So look not just to double checking that each piece is working on its own accord, but also to whether or not they are properly intertwined. Writing set piece scenes is one of the most fulfilling experiences for a writer. However, as the linchpins of your entire story, set piece scenes can also be stressful. As long as you know what problems to look for and what aspects to strengthen, you can leverage your set piece scenes to help you create what may indeed become a set piece story. Now, I hope you'll stop by the site and tell me your opinion about this. What are some of your favorite set piece scenes in your story so far? If you'd like to be part of the word player community over on my site and join in the conversation on this subject, be sure to stop by the website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. You can always find a transcript of the most recent podcast and add your voice to the discussion by visiting the first post on the site's homepage. And don't forget that if you're looking for an older post, you can always find those by putting the podcast title in the search field at the top of the right-hand column. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Amazon Music, or whatever your favorite podcast platform may be. And if you'd like to do something to support helping writers become authors, it always means a ton if you're able to leave just a quick rating or review on your site of choice. Also, many thanks to those who support my work on Patreon. Your patronage helps make helping writers become authors and its many resources available to writers everywhere. If you're interested in becoming a patron, you can find out more at patreon.com/kmwyland. Thank you so much for listening to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast, and be sure to check back again next week.